The night gripped the remote African village with an almost tangible chill, a darkness so profound it seemed to press in on the small, isolated dwellings. A faint breeze rustled through the dry savanna grass, carrying with it the distant, eerie cries of nocturnal creatures, sounds that usually settled into the background hum of the wild. But tonight, they felt charged with a different kind of tension. Inside one such humble home, a lone woman sat, not entirely still, her senses acutely aware of every shift in the air, every subtle vibration carried through the packed earth floor. She wasn't fearful in the conventional sense, not of the wild that surrounded her, but a primal instinct buzzed at the edge of her awareness, whispering of something unnatural, something approaching with intent. Yet, amidst the growing disquiet outside, an unexpected warmth radiated from a shadowed corner of her small living space, a low, contented rumble that was distinctly feline, a stark contrast to the human-born threat she felt looming. It was a sound that spoke of untamed wilderness, yet in this moment it was a sound of comfort, of presence. This was Sarah, an American wildlife conservationist whose unwavering spirit had led her far from the familiar comforts of her homeland to this rugged, breathtaking expanse of the African savanna. Her skin, perpetually tanned by the relentless sun, and her eyes, often crinkled at the corners from squinting at distant horizons, held a deep, quiet resolve. Sarah had dedicated her entire adult life to the protection of local wildlife, often finding herself swimming against currents of ancient beliefs and deep-seated fears held by the very communities she sought to help. She understood their worries, the historical friction between humans and wild beasts, but she also saw a path to coexistence, a delicate balance that honored both nature and human survival. Her simple dwelling, constructed from local materials, stood as a testament to her integration, yet also her difference, a beacon of a new way of thinking in a land steeped in tradition. Her most recent transgression, in the eyes of some villagers, was her unconventional act of feeding an injured leopard. She had found it, barely a cub, caught in a snare left by poachers, its leg badly mangled. Against all advice, against the warnings of local elders who spoke of the inherent danger of such a creature, Sarah had nursed it back to health in secret, pouring her heart and limited resources into its recovery. She named the leopard Shadow for its elusive grace and the way it seemed to melt into the dappled light of the savanna. This unusual bond, however, had not gone unnoticed. Whispers spread like wildfire through the village, often fueled by suspicion and resentment from a group of local hunters. They viewed the leopard not as an animal deserving of compassion, but as a dangerous threat to their livestock, and perhaps even more importantly, a magnificent prize, a trophy that symbolized prowess and survival. For them, Sarah's actions were not just eccentric. They were a direct challenge to their way of life, an unnatural partnership that defied the established order of man against beast. The hunters, led by their taciturn and stern elder, openly questioned Sarah's sanity and her motives. They saw her efforts as meddling, as a weakness that endangered their community. How could one woman, a foreigner no less, understand the fierce, unpredictable nature of a leopard? How could she believe it could be anything but a harbinger of trouble? Their glares in the market square, their hushed conversations that abruptly ceased when she approached, all spoke volumes. Sarah felt their hostility keenly, a heavy weight on her shoulders, but her commitment to Shadow and to the larger cause of conservation remained unshaken. She knew what she was doing was right, even if it meant standing alone against the tide of tradition and fear. This was just the beginning of her story, a tale where an unlikely bond would be tested against the raw forces of human nature and the untamed wild. Before we delve deeper into Sarah's incredible journey and the extraordinary events that unfolded, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more inspiring narratives of survival, courage, and the often surprising connections forged between humans and the animal kingdom. You won't want to miss what happens next. The leopard, an enigmatic shadow, began to make its presence known with increasing regularity around Sarah's secluded homestead. Shadow, as she affectionately called the creature, would often leave small, peculiar offerings near her doorstep. A freshly killed bird, a discarded bone, sometimes even a half-eaten fruit. These weren't gestures of aggression, but rather an unusual form of communication, a testament to the developing trust between them. Sarah found herself often waking to the soft thud of paws outside her window, or catching a fleeting glimpse of the leopard's sleek form disappearing into the tall grasses at dawn. This extraordinary connection, however, only served to deepen the chasm between Sarah and the wary villagers. They watched from a distance, their whispers turning into murmurs of suspicion, fueled by fear and ancient beliefs. How could a woman live so openly alongside such a dangerous predator? It was unnatural, they concluded, a defiance of the natural order that bred resentment and unease. The local hunters, a tight-knit and traditional group, were particularly vocal in their disapproval. For them, a leopard was either a threat to their cattle and families or a valuable trophy, never a companion. Their leader, a man named Thomas, embodied this rigid perspective. Thomas was a formidable figure in the village, his face etched with years of sun and experience, his eyes keen and unyielding. He represented the old ways, the ingrained belief that man must conquer nature, not coexist with it. To him, Shadow was a prime example of a menace that needed to be eradicated, and Sarah's actions were an affront to their traditions and safety. He made no secret of his disdain, his voice often carrying an edge of barely concealed anger when he spoke of Sarah and her pet. He openly questioned her loyalty to the village, implying she put the life of a beast above the well-being of her neighbors. Sarah, ever the optimist, initially attempted to bridge this growing divide. She would walk into the village square, her shoulders squared, her gaze direct, and try to explain the delicate balance of the ecosystem, the vital role predators played in maintaining healthy wildlife populations. She spoke passionately about how a healthy leopard population indicated a thriving environment, and how their presence could even deter other, more destructive pests. She argued that coexistence was not only possible, but necessary for the long-term survival of both humans and the natural world they inhabited. She presented scientific data, shared stories from other conservation projects, and even invited some of the more curious villagers to observe her work with other, less threatening animals. But her words, meticulously chosen and delivered with genuine conviction, seemed to fall on deaf ears. The deeply ingrained fear of the wild, passed down through generations, was a powerful barrier. Thomas would often interrupt her, scoffing at her foreign notions, his words resonating with the villagers who shared his anxieties. He would point to stories of cattle lost in previous seasons, attributing every unexplained disappearance to the lurking danger of leopards. Tradition, solidified by generations of hunting and protection of livestock, proved to be an almost impenetrable wall against Sarah's progressive ideas. The chasm only widened, hardening the villagers' stance and solidifying Thomas's opposition as the silent bond between Sarah and Shadow grew stronger, more profound, and increasingly isolated in the face of mounting apprehension. The whispers began subtly, like the rustling of dry leaves before a storm. Then, a series of unfortunate events escalated the tension, turning whispers into outright accusations. Minor livestock disappearances plagued the village. First, a goat vanished from its tethered spot near the edge of the savannah. Then, a few nights later, 3 chickens were gone, leaving only scattered feathers. Each incident, though small, chipped away at the fragile peace and was immediately, undeniably, blamed on Shadow. Sarah, her heart sinking with each new report, knew the implications. Thomas, always quick to capitalize on fear, seized these opportunities to rally the villagers against her and the leopard she so fiercely protected. He painted vivid, terrifying pictures of Shadow lurking in the darkness, a cunning predator grown bold by Sarah's misguided kindness. He would stand in the village square, his voice booming with feigned concern, gesturing dramatically towards the distant bush. This beast, emboldened by the American woman, now preys on our livelihood. Are we to stand by while our families starve because of her unnatural attachment to a wild killer? His words, laced with old prejudices and fueled by genuine economic hardship, struck a powerful chord. Sarah, attempting to offer alternative explanations, perhaps hyenas or even opportunistic jackals, which were far more common perpetrators of such small-scale raids, found her voice drowned out by the rising tide of fear and resentment. She pointed out that Shadow's typical prey consisted of larger game, and that leopards were usually far too elusive to be caught near human settlements so often. But logic held little sway against deeply ingrained fear. The pressure mounted, a suffocating weight that pressed in on Sarah from all sides. Elders, once respectful, now avoided her gaze or offered thinly veiled warnings. Women clutched their children closer when she passed, their eyes darting nervously towards the savannah. The unspoken expectation was clear: drive Shadow away or allow the hunters to track and kill the animal. This was Sarah's profound dilemma. Her commitment to Shadow was not merely about a rescued animal. It was about her deeply held conviction that coexistence was possible, that understanding could triumph over fear. Yet, her desire to maintain peace within the community, to foster the very conservation ethic she championed, was equally strong. How could she protect Shadow without alienating the people she had come to live among, the people whose future was intrinsically linked to the land and its creatures? She spent long, sleepless nights grappling with the impossible choice. Should she try to relocate Shadow, knowing the dangers and uncertainties of such an endeavor for an animal so accustomed to her presence? Or should she simply give up, allowing the hunters to claim their trophy, thereby confirming every negative stereotype about wild animals and undermining her life's work? The thought of Shadow, so sleek and powerful, yet so trusting in her company, falling victim to a hunter's snare or bullet, gnawed at her soul. Every rustle outside her window, every distant howl, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. Yet, amidst the growing animosity, a small, unexpected glimmer of hope flickered. A few younger villagers, particularly those who had seen Sarah tend to injured birds or release trapped rodents, began to cautiously question the hunter's narrative. They had witnessed Sarah's unwavering dedication, her quiet strength, and her genuine love for even the smallest creatures. These young minds, less burdened by generations of fear, saw not just a dangerous predator, but perhaps a creature deserving of life, and a woman fiercely committed to protecting it. They listened intently when Sarah spoke of the ecological balance, of how leopards, as apex predators, kept herbivore populations in check, preventing overgrazing that could destroy the very savanna that sustained the village. Their hesitant questions to their elders, though often met with gruff dismissal, were a small testament to Sarah's passion quietly sowing seeds of change. It was a fragile hope, but in the escalating darkness, it was enough to keep her fighting. The fragile hope, however, was quickly overshadowed by the chilling declaration that echoed through the village. Thomas, his face grim with resolve, and his voice carrying the authority he had meticulously cultivated, publicly announced their intention to hunt Shadow down. He stood before the gathering, flanked by his most trusted hunters, their expressions mirroring his grim determination. The time for talk was over, he proclaimed. The time for action had come. They would rid the village of this menace, this unnatural presence that Sarah had foolishly nurtured. The hunters, emboldened by Thomas's leadership and the widespread fear, meticulously planned their night search. They would target the areas immediately surrounding Sarah's humble home, convinced that the leopard, having grown accustomed to her proximity, would be lurking nearby, an easy target. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, a mix of apprehension and grudging approval washing over the crowd. Sarah's heart sank, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Desperation gnawed at her, a bitter taste on her tongue. She knew this was the point of no return. With every fiber of her being, she made one last, impassioned plea to the village elders. She sought them out in their traditional council hut, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. She spoke of the leopard's intelligence, its essential role in the ecosystem, its peaceful nature when undisturbed. She reminded them of the wisdom of their ancestors, who understood the delicate balance of life in the savanna. But their eyes, usually so full of ancient knowledge, were clouded with fear. Fear of Thomas's growing influence, fear of the perceived danger Shadow represented, and perhaps a deeper fear of change itself. Her words, usually so persuasive, now seemed to dissipate into the night air, unheard, unheeded. The elders, with heavy hearts, gently but firmly told her that the decision had been made. The hunters would proceed. Returning to her small, isolated dwelling, Sarah felt a profound sense of loneliness. The savanna, usually a source of comfort and inspiration, now seemed vast and indifferent, its nocturnal sounds taking on an ominous quality. She paced her small living space, her mind racing, searching for any way to avert the impending tragedy. There was none. The hunters were formidable, their knowledge of the land unparalleled, their resolve hardened by tradition and fear. There was no escaping their determined pursuit. She could not protect Shadow by herself, not against an armed group of men convinced they were doing what was right for their community. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a familiar shadow detached itself from the deepening twilight. It was Shadow. The leopard moved with its characteristic silent grace, appearing not as a predator, but as a watchful, almost ethereal presence. It settled beneath the ancient acacia tree near Sarah's porch, its amber eyes fixed on her. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a silent communication that transcended species. Shadow seemed to sense her distress, the heavy weight of her fear, the profound weariness in her soul. It offered no growl, no aggressive posture, simply a steady, comforting presence. In that moment, their extraordinary, improbable bond deepened even further, forging an unbreakable connection that would soon be tested in the most perilous of circumstances. The leopard, majestic and calm, seemed to be preparing for something, its gaze holding a depth that hinted at extraordinary events on the horizon, events that would defy all expectations and challenge the very notion of what was wild and what was domestic, what was predator and what was protector. The night air grew heavy with anticipation. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of dry earth and distant cooking fires, as true darkness finally descended upon the African savanna. Sarah, inside her humble dwelling, had long since extinguished her lamp, preferring the familiar sounds of the night to the oppressive silence that seemed to precede trouble. Her heart pounded a restless rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the anxieties that had consumed her for weeks. Then, from the periphery of her senses, something shifted. A faint rustle, not the usual nocturnal scurry of rodents or the whisper of wind through the tall grasses. This was different, deliberate, a cadence of movement too heavy, too cautious. She pressed herself against the mud brick wall, listening intently, every nerve ending screaming an alert. The sounds grew more distinct, subtle snaps of twigs, hushed whispers carried on the gentle breeze, the metallic clink of something hard brushing against rock. It was unmistakable. Thomas and his hunting party. They were here, just as she had feared, surrounding her isolated house under the shroud of darkness. Their presence was a living, breathing threat, an unspoken promise of violence. Sarah knew their intent. It was etched into the very fabric of their determined silence. They were here to eliminate the leopard, Shadow, which had become not just a symbol of defiance against their traditions, but also a potent source of fear in their minds. Trapped within the confines of her small home, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The sounds outside were no longer just rustles. They were the measured approach of men, the soft thud of boots on loose soil, the almost imperceptible click of a safety catch. Her breath hitched in her throat. She was outnumbered, completely alone in this remote corner of the world, with no one to call upon for help. The nearest village elder lived a mile away, and even if she could reach them, their influence had waned against Thomas's fierce resolve. Every creak of the house, every shadow thrown by the moonlight filtering through her small window, seemed to amplify her vulnerability. She pictured Shadow out there, sleek and powerful, yet utterly unaware of the danger closing in. A wave of desperate protectiveness washed over her. Then came the chilling discovery. A more pronounced rustling, closer now, accompanied by a low, guttural murmur from one of the hunters. Sarah strained her ears, trying to decipher the hushed exchange. A moment later, a clearer, more triumphant whisper cut through the night. "Fresh tracks. Right here by her door. It's been here recently, Thomas." The words were like a physical blow. They had found signs of Shadow's recent presence, confirming their suspicions, hardening their resolve. The air around her house seemed to crackle with an almost palpable tension, a predatory energy that pulsed with their certainty. This wasn't just a search anymore. It was a hunt, and her home was the epicenter. Their confidence, fueled by the fresh evidence, would only make them bolder, more ruthless. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, a silent plea forming on her lips, a desperate hope that Shadow, somehow, somewhere, would sense the impending doom and stay far away. But deep down, a terrifying premonition told her otherwise. The stage was set, the players in position, and the savannah held its breath, awaiting the inevitable confrontation. The air hung thick and heavy, a palpable tension pressing down on Sarah's small, isolated home. The distant sounds of the African night, usually a comforting symphony, now seemed to conspire against her, each rustle of leaves, each chirp of an insect magnifying her dread. Inside, Sarah huddled in the oppressive darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs, straining to decipher the hushed whispers and furtive movements that confirmed her worst fears. Thomas and his hunting party were here, a dark, menacing silhouette against the faint starlight, encircling her sanctuary. She could almost feel their collective breath, their predatory intent. Her mind raced, desperate for a solution, a way to warn Shadow, to somehow avert the inevitable clash that was hurtling towards them with brutal force. She knew her pleas had fallen on deaf ears, her logic dismissed as foolishness. This was no longer about reason. It was about ancient fears, about territory, and about the brutal assertion of dominance. Just as the hunters were about to breach the invisible perimeter of her small property, just as Thomas, with grim determination etched on his face, raised a hand to signal the final push, a sound ripped through the stillness of the savannah night. It wasn't the tentative snort of a nervous antelope or the distant cry of a nocturnal bird. It was a deep, guttural roar, primal and resonant, vibrating through the very earth beneath their feet. The sound seemed to materialize from nowhere, impossibly close, a thunderous declaration that froze the hunters in their tracks. It was Shadow. The magnificent leopard appeared as if conjured from the shadows themselves, a phantasmagorical beast stepping out of the darkness directly into the path of the stunned hunters. Its eyes, twin pools of liquid gold, fixed on them with an intensity that promised both danger and an intelligence far beyond mere animal instinct. Shadow didn't charge, didn't immediately attack in a frenzied display of aggression. Instead, it moved with a deliberate, almost regal grace, positioning itself squarely between Sarah's humble dwelling and the advancing line of men. The powerful muscles rippled beneath its patterned coat, a living embodiment of wild, untamed strength. The leopard stood firm, a formidable, silent guardian, its tail twitching slowly, almost imperceptibly, a clear warning. It was a vision of breathtaking, terrifying beauty, utterly focused, utterly resolved. A collective gasp, quickly stifled, rippled through the hunting party. Weapons, previously held with a grim certainty, now wavered, their purposeful weight feeling suddenly inadequate against this unexpected supernatural apparition. Thomas, usually unflappable, swallowed hard, his bravado momentarily evaporating in the face of such raw, untamed power. He had anticipated a hunt, a chase, perhaps even a brief struggle with a cornered animal. He had not anticipated this. This was not a beast to be hunted. This was a force of nature, a sentinel standing guard. The air crackled with an unbearable tension, thick enough to taste. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. The only sound was the faint hum of insects and the steady, heavy breathing of men who had suddenly become the prey in a silent, deadly standoff. Each hunter, from the most seasoned veteran to the youngest recruit, felt the unnerving weight of Shadow's gaze. It wasn't just physical intimidation, it was a profound psychological shock. They had come to kill a dangerous animal, a pest, a trophy. They now faced an entity that seemed to understand their intentions, an entity that had purposefully placed itself in harm's way to protect someone or something within that small, vulnerable house. The unspoken question hung heavy in the night. Why? Why was this feared predator acting not as a hunter, but as a protector, a silent, unwavering shield? The entire dynamic of their mission had been flipped on its head in an instant, transforming their confident pursuit into a precarious, deeply unsettling confrontation. Thomas, momentarily paralyzed by the sheer audacity and unexpectedness of the leopard's intervention, could only stare, his mind scrambling to comprehend the impossible tableau before him. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. This was something entirely new, something beyond his experience, beyond his understanding of the wild. The hunters, despite their initial bravado and the swaggering confidence they had exhibited only moments before, were fundamentally unnerved by Shadow's unwavering presence. Thomas, a man who prided himself on his control and his ability to command respect, found his voice caught in his throat, his carefully constructed plan dissolving into a haze of disbelief and fear. He tried to rally his men, a guttural sound escaping his lips that was meant to be an order, but it lacked conviction, sounding more like a desperate plea than a directive. The raw power emanating from the Leopard, its sheer, unyielding determination, was an invisible force that pressed down on them, stifling their aggressiveness. The unexpected loyalty the animal displayed, a silent vow to protect, was an undeniable spectacle, challenging everything they believed about the ferocity and unpredictability of wild beasts. This wasn't the cunning, opportunistic predator they had tracked. This was a sentient guardian, a formidable, intelligent force. Among the group, a young hunter named Kyle, barely an adult, shifted nervously. He had been quietly observing Sarah's interactions with Shadow from a distance over the past months, witnessing the strange, almost tender exchanges that had seemed so out of place in their harsh landscape. He had seen Sarah leave food, seen Shadow approach without aggression, a mutual respect passing between them that defied all logic. Now, Kale saw not a bloodthirsty beast worthy of a trophy, but a protector, a sentinel of remarkable fidelity. The golden eyes of the Leopard, gleaming in the pale moonlight, held no malice for them, only an immovable resolve. Kale's hand, clutching his spear, began to tremble slightly. He glanced at the other hunters, their faces etched with a similar confusion, a dawning realization that this was not a hunt anymore, but an impossible ethical dilemma. Their prey had chosen its side, and that side was not theirs. Thomas, his face a mask of frustration and grudging respect, scanned the faces of his men. He saw the doubt, the wavering resolve, the subtle shifts in their posture that betrayed their internal conflict. He understood, with a bitter taste in his mouth, that this battle, once seemingly assured, was now unwinnable. They could try to overcome the Leopard, perhaps even succeed, but at what cost? The image of Shadow standing there, defiant and majestic, would forever be seared into their minds, a testament to an inexplicable truth. More importantly, he sensed that even if they managed to kill the Leopard, it would be a hollow victory, tainted by the unsettling knowledge that they had slain not a threat, but a guardian. The solidarity of his hunting party, once so strong, was fracturing under the weight of this extraordinary encounter. With a heavy sigh that carried the weight of his deflated pride, Thomas finally lowered his own weapon. He bit out a terse, almost inaudible command. "We retreat." The words hung in the air, a stunning admission of defeat. One by one, the other hunters followed suit, their spears and bows slowly dropping, a heavy silence descending upon the clearing. They turned, not in unison, but with a palpable sense of relief, their figures melting back into the shadows from which they had emerged. The rustling of leaves and snapping twigs marked their hesitant departure, a sound that gradually faded into the African night. The silence that followed was thick with a mixture of fear, awe, and a grudging respect that had been born from the jaws of an impossible confrontation. Shadow remained, unmoving, until the last whisper of their presence had vanished. Only then did the Leopard finally, slowly, turn its head towards Sarah's house, its golden eyes holding a depth of understanding that transcended words. The standoff, stretched taut like an overdrawn bowstring, finally began to unravel with a hesitant shift in Thomas's posture. His chest, which moments ago had swelled with indignant rage, now seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping barely perceptible under the weight of the impossible situation. He cast a wary glance at his men, whose faces reflected a mixture of fear, bewilderment, and a nascent unsettling respect for the creature before them. Their initial fervor had been thoroughly doused by Shadow's unwavering presence. Thomas barked out a low, guttural order, barely audible, a concession disguised as command. Slowly, reluctantly, the hunters began to back away, their eyes never leaving the magnificent leopard. They retreated, defeated and humbled, their weapons now hanging limply at their sides, the night's hunt abandoned, its purpose irrevocably altered. Shadow watched them go, its gaze piercing, unblinking, until the last rustling of leaves faded into the profound silence of the savanna night. Only then did its powerful body relax slightly, the tension bleeding from its coiled form. It turned its head, its golden eyes seeking out the faint glow of light from Sarah's window. For a long moment, an eternity in the quiet night, the leopard and the woman shared a silent acknowledgement. It was a wordless communication of their shared ordeal, a profound understanding that transcended species and circumstance. Then, with a fluid, almost ethereal movement, Shadow melted back into the shadows from which it had emerged, disappearing as gracefully as it had appeared, leaving behind only the lingering scent of wildness and the echo of its impossible courage. The first faint blush of dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern sky, washing the world in hues of rose and gold, as if to mark the end of one chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. The incident, whispered from villager to villager, grew in magnitude with each telling. The story of the guardian leopard spread like wildfire, transforming from rumor into legend. No longer was Shadow merely a dangerous predator. It was a miraculous protector, a symbol of something greater than their long-held fears. The confrontation at Sarah's house became a pivotal turning point for the community. Slowly, painstakingly, the villagers began to see Sarah and the wildlife around them in a new, more nuanced light. Her once isolated conservation efforts now seemed less like eccentricities and more like profound wisdom. Thomas, his authority irreparably undermined by his humiliating retreat and the undeniable proof of the leopard's loyalty, lost much of his influence. The younger villagers, who had already shown an inclination toward questioning tradition, now spoke openly of coexistence, inspired by Shadow's impossible act. The children, once taught to fear every shadow, now spoke of the leopard with a reverence that skirted adoration, their imaginations sparked by the tale of the woman and her wild guardian. Sarah continued her work, now not merely tolerated, but embraced with a cautious, growing acceptance from the community. She knew the delicate balance between humans and nature was incredibly fragile, constantly threatened by misunderstanding and fear, yet she also knew it was unequivocally achievable. Through her extraordinary bond with Shadow, she had found a profound wisdom, an undeniable truth that the wild and human worlds could not only coexist, but could, in moments of deepest need, protect one another. Her home, once a beacon of suspicion, now became a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of empathy and the unexpected alliances formed at the edges of the wild heart of Africa. The savanna, with its ancient rhythms and untamed beauty, continued to thrive, and within its vast embrace, a new understanding had begun to take root, nurtured by the courage of a woman and the loyalty of a leopard. If this incredible true story touched your heart, please take a moment to like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of survival, courage, and the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Let us know in the comments what you think about the unbelievable connection between Sarah and Shadow. And be sure to check out our next video for another amazing animal encounter that will leave you breathless.